Morning crept into the small apartment in Somerville, pale and muted, the kind of light that made everything feel colder than it was. Sarah Whitman silenced her phone alarm with the same tired motion she made every day, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed and planting her feet on the hardwood floor that always felt a little too cold. Behind her, Nathan Whitman let out an irritated groan, rolling away from the light as if even dawn existed solely to inconvenience him. He tugged his robe tighter around himself with a theatrical sigh. She had almost reached the hallway when his voice, thick with sleep and annoyance, cut through the quiet. "No breakfast today? My little businesswoman's too busy saving the world." The comment landed like a slap. Sarah paused, hand on the doorway, forcing herself not to react. "I didn't know when you'd wake up," she said softly. "I'm running late. I really have to go." Nathan snorted. "Of course you do. Run off to that bookstore. God forbid you stay and do something useful for once." The last words hit her squarely between the shoulders as she slipped into her coat and left the apartment. He always did that, waited until she was almost out the door before reminding her how insignificant he considered her job. She pushed her chestnut hair behind her ears, steadied her breathing, and headed toward the park path that led to the Beacon Hill bookstore. Inside, the quiet space usually brought her comfort, the smell of paper, the muted hum of the city outside, the familiar green apron she slipped over her clothes. She flipped the sign to open, though no customers came at that hour. It gave her a moment to breathe, to wrap her hands around a cup of coffee and read a chapter of the novel she kept behind the counter. Outside, a light drizzle began, blurring the windows like watercolor. Her phone buzzed. "How's work?" Nathan's message flashed across the screen. She rolled her eyes and set the phone face down. If he had woken up irritated, he would stay that way until night. When the bell over the door jingled, Sarah expected a customer. Instead, Carolyn Price, tall, impeccably dressed, always composed, stepped inside, shaking off raindrops from her coat. "Morning, Sarah," she said gently. "Got a minute?" Sarah's stomach tightened. Conversations that began that way rarely ended well. Carolyn glanced toward the door, flipped the sign to closed, and motioned toward the reading chair near the front windows. "You've probably noticed things haven't been great lately," Carolyn began. "Sales have been dropping for months. And I have to be honest, this shop has always been more of a passion project for me." Sarah nodded, throat tight. "I'm relocating for a while. New commitments. New city." Carolyn folded her hands. "I won't be able to run the store anymore. Today is our last day." The words hollowed her out. Even though the store had never paid much, it had given her a sense of purpose, a place where she felt competent, needed, valued. "I'll pay you for the full month," Carolyn added kindly. "I want you to have time to find something else." Sarah managed a thank you, but her voice wavered. When she stepped outside into the gray afternoon, the rain had grown colder. Each drop seemed to echo the dread pooling in her stomach. She dreaded telling Nathan. She dreaded going home. She dreaded being seen as even more of a burden. By the time she reached the apartment, her clothes clung to her, soaked through. She slipped quietly inside. Nathan was laughing at something on his computer. Gunfire from a video game boomed through the living room. When he finally glanced her way, his expression soured. "This is dinner," he demanded when he saw her assembling a few quick sandwiches. "You couldn't make a real meal? What do you even do all day? You're practically living off me, like some kind of parasite." She froze, the butter knife trembling in her hand. "Nathan, I just didn't have the energy to cook tonight." "You never do." His voice sharpened. "And what exactly are you bringing into this household? That pathetic paycheck? You can't even hold down a basic job." Heat rose behind her eyes. The room felt too small, too loud, too suffocating. She sank into a chair, biting down the tears that threatened to spill. He kept going, fueled by bitterness, by resentment, by the entitlement he wore like a second skin. And as he ranted, the world around her tightened, an emotional pressure cooker building towards something inevitable, something she couldn't yet name. But she felt it, the first fracture, the beginning of collapse. The tension in the apartment didn't fade with evening. It thickened, settled, and curdled into something Sarah could feel in her bones. Nathan had spent the past hour pacing between the living room and the kitchen, alternating between taking swigs from a half-empty bottle of whiskey and complaining loudly about everything from his co-workers to the weather to her attitude. By the time dinner, dishes sat untouched on the table. He was already drunk enough that the sharpness in his voice turned unpredictable. He lit a cigarette, blowing smoke into the already stuffy apartment despite her begging him for months not to smoke indoors. Seriously, Sarah murmured, coughing as the haze drifted toward the hallway. Nathan, can you please? What? He snapped, spinning toward her. You don't get to tell me what to do in my house. The word "my" landed with a thud, as if he were hammering it into the air. He took another drag, staring at her through the smoke with a cold, glassy disdain. I did everything for you, he said, his voice rising. And what do you bring to this relationship? A hobby job and a bunch of whining? You are nothing without me. Absolutely nothing. Sarah's stomach tightened. The cruelty wasn't new, but tonight it had a different edge. Something darker, more volatile. She picked up her plate quietly, hoping to de-escalate. But that only irritated him further. Oh, don't start acting like a saint now. His chair scraped loudly as he stood. You think you're better than me? Is that it? Because you read books all day. Nathan, please, she whispered. Not tonight. But he was already closing the distance. When she tried to step toward the bedroom, he blocked the doorway with his body. His whiskey-roughened breath hit her face as he leaned in. Look at me when I talk to you. She forced her eyes upward. There she is, he mocked. The helpless little girl who'd be out on the streets if it weren't for me. He reached for her wrist, gripping tighter than he realized, or maybe tighter than he cared. Pain shot up her arm. She tried to pull away, but that only made him squeeze harder. Let go, she said, voice trembling. He smirked. Make me. The moment stretched, dangerously, unbearably. Then suddenly Nathan jerked his hand away as if bored with the confrontation. He staggered toward the bedroom, muttering curses under his breath, and slammed the door behind him. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. A hollow ringing filled her ears. She knew he would be back out in minutes, ready to start again. He always came back for a second round once the alcohol hit deeper. Something in her broke. Or maybe something finally woke up. She slipped into the living room and grabbed her small suitcase from behind the coat rack. With slow, precise movements, she packed only what she absolutely needed. 2 changes of clothes, her phone charger, medication, the documents she kept in a folder by the bookshelf. Each item dropped into the suitcase like a decision. When she zipped it shut, she felt the tiniest flicker of clarity. Nathan's voice erupted again from the bedroom. Sarah, get back here. I'm not done talking to you. She didn't answer. She didn't breathe. She slipped on her coat, opened the front door as quietly as she could, and stepped into the hallway. The cold Boston air hit her instantly, slicing through the thin fabric of her coat as she descended the front steps. Her breath came out in shaky clouds. She kept walking up Highland Avenue, past the shuttered cafes, into the dimly lit streets leading toward Boston Common. Her suitcase wheels rattled unevenly across cracked sidewalks. Every sound made her flinch. Occasionally she looked behind her, terrified she'd see Nathan storming down the street. By the time she reached the edge of the Common, the city felt too big, too loud, too indifferent. She stopped under a street lamp, unsure of where to go next. You all right, ma'am? She jolted. A uniformed night security officer approached, middle-aged, weathered, steady. His nameplate read Hughes. Frank Hughes studied her for a moment. "You look shaken. Do you need help getting somewhere safe?" Her voice cracked. I just need somewhere to stay for the night." He nodded with quiet understanding. "Come on. There's a budget hotel a few blocks down in downtown Crossing. I'll walk you there." The escort felt surreal, like walking through a fog she couldn't fully see through. Frank stayed beside her, keeping a respectful distance, guiding her through the dim streets until the glowing hotel sign appeared ahead. Inside the lobby, she checked in with what little money she had. When the room door finally clicked shut behind her, the silence hit her like a wave. She stood in the middle of the small space, just one bed, one lamp, one window, and realized the truth in full. She had no job, no savings, no home, only a single suitcase and the terrifying freedom of having walked away. Morning light seeped through the thin curtains of the budget hotel room, waking Sarah far earlier than she would have liked. Her body felt heavy, as if the events of the previous night had settled into her bones. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment before forcing herself upright. There was no one to rely on, no safety net, no time to fall apart. She dressed quietly, splashed cold water on her face, and sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through job listings. Retail, hospitality, cleaning services, administrative work. She applied to everything she remotely qualified for. And within an hour, the rejections began landing in her inbox, position filled, seeking more experienced candidates. "Thank you." But each ding of her phone tightened the knot in her stomach. But she kept going, sending resume after resume, trying to ignore the mounting dread. The Beacon Hill bookstore had been her anchor, small as it was. Without it, the world felt frighteningly unsteady. Across town in Somerville, trouble was breaking open in an entirely different way. Nathan was woken by frantic pounding on the apartment door. Sharp, relentless. His head throbbed from last night's whiskey as he stumbled forward, cursing. When he opened the door, his mother, Linda Whitman, nearly shoved past him in her panic. Her face was ashen, her hands trembling, her voice the brittle whisper of someone trying not to fall apart. "Nathan, your father's been arrested." He blinked hard, trying to make sense of the words. What? Arrested for what? Financial crimes. Fraud. Embezzlement. Linda's voice cracked. Everything is frozen. Bank accounts. Properties. The whole portfolio. For a moment, Nathan just stood there, mouth open, as if waiting for someone to tell him it was a joke. His father had always been powerful, untouchable, a man with influence, lawyers' connections. The idea of him being dragged into custody was impossible, unthinkable. But his mother's shaking hands, the frantic way she rifled through drawers searching for documents, made the truth undeniable. "This can't be happening," he muttered, pacing. "He'll fix it. He always fixes things." Not this time. Tears welled in Linda's eyes. The investigators seized everything. Nathan froze. "Everything? What about my accounts?" Linda shook her head weakly. The color drained from his face. For years, he had lived comfortably off the money his father deposited into his account. Rent, food, nights out, online shopping, all funded by a credit card he hadn't earned. And now, in a single morning, the ground had vanished beneath him. When he tried calling his friends for help, most didn't answer. Those who did kept the conversations short, uncomfortable. The Whitman name, once a ticket into every room, had become toxic overnight. Doors that once swung open for him slammed shut. He was alone, terrifyingly alone. Meanwhile, miles away, Sarah sat in a small cafe near downtown Crossing, stirring a cup of oatmeal slowly, staring through the window at the steady flow of commuters. Her mind drifted, not to Nathan, not to their apartment, not to the hurt, but to the unfamiliar, scary possibility that she might rebuild her life from nothing. She took small, deliberate bites, The breakfast wasn't much, but at least it was warm. When she returned to the hotel, she found the front desk in mild chaos. Guests lined up. A printer jammed, the phone ringing nonstop. Alex O'Connor, the night clerk who had checked her in the previous evening, looked overwhelmed, caught between answering questions and digging through a stack of misplaced reservation forms. Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward. "Do you want me to help with that?" she asked. Alex blinked, startled but relieved. "Honestly, yes. Please." She quickly sorted forms, calmed an irritated couple, and fixed the printer jam that had been halting the entire check-in system. Her movements were quiet, efficient, steady. Within minutes, the lobby was back under control. Alex let out a long breath. "I owe you. Seriously. Most people would have just walked past." Sarah shrugged lightly. "I just saw you needed help." He studied her for a moment, then lowered his voice. "You said you were looking for work, right?" She nodded. "Well," he continued, pulling a business card from his pocket, "I know someone, private client, a dentist, needs occasional housekeeping at his home and at his place out near Lexington. Good pay. Flexible hours." Sarah stared at the card, hope flickering for the first time in days. "Would you like me to give him your number?" Alex asked, after a beat. She nodded. "Yes, please." And just like that, a tiny sliver of possibility opened, quiet, fragile, but real. 2 days later, Sarah stood at the base of a quiet, tree-lined street in Brookline, staring up at a modest but elegant 2-story home with white shutters and a deep blue door. Winter sunlight skimmed across the front porch, catching on the potted evergreens flanking the steps. Everything about the house felt warm, orderly, lived in, the opposite of her old apartment, where tension seeped into the walls like damp. She clutched the business card Alex had given her, took a steadying breath, and rang the bell. The door opened to reveal a man in his mid-40s with gentle brown eyes and calm posture. Dr. Daniel Mercer. His presence felt quiet rather than imposing, professional. Soft-spoken, the kind of person who eased a room just by standing in it. "Sarah Whitman?" he asked. She nodded. "Thank you for coming. Please come in. Shoes are fine." The entryway smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. Family photos lined the hall. Daniel at dental school graduation. Daniel with an elderly couple she assumed were his parents. Daniel on a fishing trip. Everything suggested a man grounded in routine and structure. "I heard from Alex that you might be available for some housekeeping help," Daniel said, guiding her through the living room. "Mostly light cleaning at first, floors, surfaces. Laundry if you're comfortable. I have a small practice in Brighton, and I'm juggling more than I should." His tone wasn't apologetic, just honest. "Yes," Sarah replied softly. "I can do all of that." He showed her the kitchen next. Bright windows, granite counters, neatly labeled spice jars. The space looked immaculate to Sarah's eyes. But Daniel ran a hand along the counter, self-consciously. "My sister usually keeps things organized, but she's been busy lately." The warmth in his voice shifted, just slightly when he mentioned her. Affection, blended with something more complicated. "How many hours would you need each week?" Sarah asked. "Maybe 6 to 10, depending on how things go. And if you prefer to work while I'm at the office, that's completely fine." His consideration surprised her. Nathan had never once asked what she preferred. Not about chores, work, meals, or anything else. As Daniel walked her toward the laundry room, footsteps sounded sharply behind them, heels clicking against hardwood. Sarah turned. A woman stood in the doorway, tall, stunningly put together, and watching her with an expression that was almost polite, almost. Her coat looked expensive enough to cover several months of Sarah's rent. Her hair was perfect, her makeup subtle but unmistakably skilled. Victoria Mercer. She didn't speak at first, just assessed, dissected. The air seemed to thin under her gaze. Daniel cleared his throat. Victoria, this is Sarah. She might help us around the house during the week. Victoria's lips lifted into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Help? With what exactly? Daniel answered gently. Just the usual. I've been behind on things. Behind? Victoria stepped forward, her tone light but edged. I thought the house was perfectly fine. It is, Daniel said evenly, but I'd appreciate extra hands. Victoria's attention slid back to Sarah, the smile tightening. And you have experience doing this? Sarah forced her voice steady. Yes, I've done housekeeping before. Where? There was no curiosity in the question, only challenge. At a small boutique hotel downtown. Victoria nodded slowly, as if filing the information away for later use. I see. Daniel continued the tour, but Victoria followed closely, her presence a cold shadow trailing every step. In the kitchen, she opened cabinets Sarah hadn't touched and pointed out imagined imperfections. The glasses aren't aligned, she murmured. And the counter. I don't like streaks. Sarah glanced at the counter, spotless. Daniel shot his sister a warning look. Victoria. What? She replied innocently. I'm just making sure things are done correctly. You can't expect every stranger to know how you like your home. Stranger. The word landed like a pebble dropped into a still pond, small but unsettling. Sarah said nothing. Years with Nathan had taught her exactly when speaking would only make things worse. At the end of the walk-through, Daniel stopped near the front door. So, what do you think? Sarah hesitated only a moment. She needed the work, desperately, and despite Victoria's icy reception, Daniel had treated her with steady, genuine respect, something she hadn't felt in months. Yes, she said quietly. I'll take it. Daniel smiled, relieved. Great. I'll text you the schedule and key instructions. Victoria crossed her arms, her expression unreadable except for the faint curl of disapproval at the corner of her lips. As Sarah stepped back out into the chilly Brookline air, she felt the warmth of Daniel's kindness lingering behind her, and the sharp, unmistakable warning in Victoria's eyes. She had taken the job, but she knew the real challenge had only just begun. The work settled into a rhythm over the next few weeks. Predictable, steady, and, in its own way, comforting. Sarah took on a handful of housekeeping clients across Boston, hopping between apartments in Back Bay, condos in Allston, a brownstone in Jamaica Plain, and, of course, the Mercer home in Brookline twice a week. The income wasn't much, but it was consistent, predictable. For someone who had lost everything overnight, consistency felt like survival. At the Mercer house, Daniel remained exactly as he had seemed that first day, steady, respectful, and quietly grateful. He left detailed notes about what needed to be done, always phrased as requests, never commands. When he worked from home, he often stepped out of his office just to ask if she needed water, a coffee, or a break. He never hovered, never inspected her work with the cold scrutiny she had once endured from Nathan. His presence felt like breathing room, but the house also held another presence, one that tightened the air whenever she walked through the door. Victoria. Her hostility started small, barely noticeable, harmless on the surface. "Oh, you fold towels that way," she'd murmur, tilting her head with calculated sweetness. "That's interesting." Or, "Most people scrub clockwise. It prevents streaks." Or, "You're early. I wasn't expecting you yet." "It's fine. Just try to be mindful of the schedule." Little comments at first. Nitpicks. Then they sharpened. "You missed a corner under the counter." "These shirts are too crisp. It looks unnatural." Daniel likes his socks rolled, not folded. But whenever Daniel walked into the room, her entire demeanor transformed. She became warm, solicitous, almost glowing with sisterly affection. She'd laugh lightly at his jokes, compliment the dinner he planned to cook later, ask about his patients. Her voice softened, her posture straightened, and her hostility evaporated as if it had never existed. When Daniel left the room, the temperature dropped instantly. More than once, Sarah caught Victoria watching her, not with anger, but with something sharper, something that felt like calculation. Still, Sarah endured it. She needed the money. She needed the stability. And she reminded herself constantly that this was temporary. A stepping stone. Nothing more. One Wednesday morning, she was wiping down the kitchen island when an older woman walked in through the back door, carrying a caddy of cleaning supplies. Her face brightened the moment she saw Sarah. "You must be Sarah," she said, extending a gloved hand. "I'm Patricia Lane. Been cleaning for this family for, Lord, at least 18 years. Sarah shook her hand gratefully. "I've heard about you." Patricia laughed. "Good things, I hope." She had kind eyes and the comfortable way of speaking that comes from decades of understanding how households function. Together, they moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, Patricia scrubbing the stovetop while Sarah worked through the refrigerator shelves. "You're doing a fine job," Patricia said quietly, glancing toward the hallway to ensure Victoria wasn't within earshot. "She's not easy, you know." Sarah hesitated. "Victoria." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Just keep your eyes open. She runs hot and cold. Has for years." "I've noticed," Sarah admitted. "She's not cruel," Patricia continued softly. "Not exactly. But she gets sharp when she's stressed. And she's stressed a lot." That was the politest way anyone could have described it. As they worked, Patricia shared gentle pieces of context, not gossip, not accusations. Just small observations accumulated over nearly 2 decades. Victoria had always been meticulous, always protective of Daniel, always quick to take control of any room she entered. She also had a history of sudden mood swings, stretches of perfection followed by bursts of icy criticism. "Just stay alert," Patricia repeated, her voice soft but firm. "Not scared, just aware." Sarah nodded. She appreciated the warning, though it only confirmed what she already sensed. The following week, the tension escalated. Victoria inspected the laundry basket Sarah had folded and exhaled sharply. "These shirts are too flat. They crease at the shoulders when you stack them like this. Didn't they teach you proper folding at that hotel?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but footsteps echoed from down the hall. Daniel emerging from his office. Instantly, Victoria's tone shifted. "Daniel, I was just saying how grateful I am for Sarah's help. She's been wonderful." Sarah kept her eyes down, her jaw tight, pretending not to hear the contradiction. When Daniel left the room again, Victoria leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a whisper sharpened by jealousy or suspicion. Sarah couldn't tell which. "Whatever you think this job is, remember one thing," she murmured. "You're temporary." Sarah didn't respond. She simply carried the laundry basket downstairs, her steps measured, her expression steady. Temporary, yes, but necessary. And despite the icy comments and the quiet cruelty, something in her had begun to solidify, a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed, the kind that grew not from comfort, but from enduring what she once believed would break her. She would survive this. She had to. The first real cold snap of November rolled through Boston when Daniel approached Sarah with a new request. He met her at the front door one morning, coat already on, travel mug in hand, the quiet urgency of someone juggling too many responsibilities. "Sarah," he said gently, "I need a favor. There's a family cabin up in New Hampshire, about 2 hours north. We use it mostly in summer, but winter can be harsh out there. I'd like it cleaned and checked before the snow really settles in." He paused, studying her face. "Would you be comfortable taking the bus up? I'll cover the fare and pay extra for the trip." Sarah nodded almost immediately. The work meant income, and she was used to traveling alone. Daniel handed her a small ring of keys, a printed bus schedule, and a notepad with instructions. Everything you need should be inside the cabin. Take your time, and thank you. His sincerity warmed her more than the coat she pulled tightly around herself as she stepped back into the chilly Boston morning. The journey north took most of the day. The bus wound through fading autumn landscapes, bare trees, rolling hills, pockets of early frost clinging to grass. By the time she stepped off at a small stop near the mountains, the air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. A local rideshare driver dropped her at the base of a narrow, unpaved road leading to the Mercer cabin. The property appeared slowly between the trees, a modest wooden home with a pitched roof, shutters painted forest green, and a porch softened by a thin layer of frost. Everything was still, silent, beautiful in a lonely way. Inside, the air smelled of dust and trapped summer memories. Sarah flicked on the lights and walked through the rooms, taking in the rustic simplicity, the stone fireplace, the worn plaid sofa, the framed photos of Daniel as a teenager fishing in the nearby lake. She set down her bag, tied her hair back, and began working, sweeping, wiping down surfaces, checking the windows for drafts, airing out each room one by one. The rhythm of cleaning calmed her mind, kept the creeping loneliness at bay. But midway through scrubbing the hallway floor, she froze. A sound, faint, barely audible, a soft bump, then something like a muffled shift on wood, coming from the back bedroom. Her heartbeat quickened. Animals sometimes got into cabins, she reminded herself. Raccoons, stray cats, even squirrels could make strange noises inside a wall. But this sound had weight, hesitation, breath. She stepped quietly toward the door and pushed it open. The room was dim, dust motes floating in the light from a single narrow window. Nothing seemed out of place until the noise came again from inside the closet. Sarah's hand shook as she wrapped her fingers around the knob and turned it slowly. Inside, pressed into the corner, was a boy, 7, maybe 8. Thin, pale, clothes dirty. Hair tangled as though he hadn't slept in a real bed for days. His wide eyes darted up at her, terrified. Sarah inhaled sharply. "Oh my God! Sweetheart, are you hurt?" He shook his head violently, shrinking back as if expecting to be struck. "It's okay," she said softly, kneeling so she wouldn't tower over him. "I won't touch you. I just want to help." The boy swallowed hard. "I'm not supposed to be here." "What's your name?" she whispered. "Jacob," he murmured. They brought me here once. For a trip. From the foster home." She blinked, trying to make sense of it. "When? Who brought you?" He hugged his knees tighter, shaking. "I'm not supposed to say." The fear in his voice wasn't normal. This wasn't a child exploring or hiding on a dare. This was something else, something darker. Sarah's instincts, sharpened by years of surviving Nathan's moods, kicked in. She couldn't leave him here. Not in an empty cabin. Not in the cold. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Jacob hesitated, then nodded quickly, almost shamefully. Sarah carried him, slowly, gently, into the kitchen, where she warmed canned soup on the stove and handed him crackers she found in the pantry. He devoured them, trembling, as if afraid the food would be taken away. When he finished, she wrapped him in her jacket. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe, okay? No one will hurt you." His eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. She wiped down the kitchen quickly, locked the cabin, and walked Jacob down the long road to the bus stop. She bought 2 tickets back to Boston, one for herself, one for a boy who didn't speak again for the entire ride, only leaning into her when the bus jolted around corners. By the time they arrived in the city that night, Sarah understood only one thing clearly. Whatever had happened at that cabin, whatever secrets Jacob was too afraid to reveal, she couldn't let him face it alone. She would protect him, at least until the truth surfaced. For the next several days, Sarah lived in quiet vigilance, always listening. always checking the hallway twice before unlocking her hotel room door. Jacob rarely let go of her hand. He followed her around the small space with silent devotion, as if afraid she might disappear if he blinked. She used what little savings she had left to buy him warm clothes from a discount shop in downtown Crossing. A navy jacket, mittens, socks, a soft beanie that made him look younger than he already was. When she tore off the tags, he watched her with wide, grateful eyes, then whispered a shy thank you, as if unused to anyone giving him anything at all. When she worked, she kept him nearby, sometimes quietly tucked in the break area behind the hotel laundry room where Alex kept an eye on him. Sometimes sitting with coloring pages at a corner table inside the Mercer house while she cleaned. Patricia noticed him once, and after Sarah's tense, whispered explanation, the older woman simply nodded and said, "Kids run from foster homes all the time. You do what you think is right." Little by little, Jacob began to unfurl. He laughed at the cartoons Sarah played on her phone, asked small questions about the city, and soaked up affection like someone starved for it. He clung to her sleeve whenever they stepped outside. But on the fourth night, she woke to the sound of his breathing, shallow, fast, strong. She sat up instantly. Jacob's skin was burning. Sweat soaked his hairline, and his tiny hands trembled under the blanket. "Jacob!" she whispered, touching his forehead. "Honey, look at me." He barely opened his eyes. "Don't take me back." Her heart clenched. "I'm not. You're sick. I need to get you help." But the moment she considered the ER, fear shot through her spine. Emergency rooms meant paperwork, insurance forms she didn't have, bills she couldn't pay, and questions she couldn't answer without exposing his situation and hers. She grabbed her phone, searching for alternatives until she found a late-night urgent care clinic in Dorchester offering walk-ins. She wrapped Jacob in a blanket, carried him downstairs, and called a rideshare despite the hit it would take on her dwindling funds. The driver glanced back at Jacob's pale face but didn't ask questions. At the clinic, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A tired but compassionate physician assistant checked his vitals, listened to his chest, and pressed cool fingers against his neck. "High fever," she murmured. "Likely viral. He's dehydrated." She looked at Sarah. "You did the right thing bringing him in. He just needs fluids, fever reducers, and rest." Relief washed over Sarah like a tide she had been holding back. When Jacob steadied enough to sit up on his own, he leaned against her shoulder, drifting in and out of sleep. But the scare changed something in her. She couldn't keep him hidden forever. Not sick, not vulnerable, not like this. The next morning, after pacing the hotel room for nearly an hour, Sarah made the decision she had been avoiding. She would take him to Quincy Children's Center, the same system he came from. She needed to know the truth of his placement, understand who he belonged to, and whether she could protect him in any formal way. Jacob sensed something wrong the moment they stepped off the bus. He stiffened, his small fingers digging desperately into her coat. The brick building loomed ahead, plain, institutional, the type of place built on routine rather than comfort. "Why are we here?" he whispered, voice cracking. "Just to talk," Sarah said gently. "I promise." But as she approached the door, Jacob pulled away, then bolted. "Jacob!" she yelled, chasing after him across the small parking lot. He stopped only when he reached the fence, breathing hard, tears already streaming. "You're leaving me," he cried. "Everybody leaves me." Her chest fractured at the sound. "I'm not leaving you," she said, dropping to her knees despite the cold pavement. "I just need to understand how to help you." But he shook his head violently, sobbing in a way that made his whole body tremble. She held him until his breathing slowed, then walked him inside, holding his hand tightly. The staff recognized him almost immediately, too quickly for Sarah's comfort. A social worker in a blue cardigan led them to a small meeting room. "We're grateful you brought him back safely," the woman said. He's been missing for days. The foster home filed a report. Sarah's voice trembled. I want to adopt him. Or foster him. Whatever I need to do. The social worker's expression softened with pity, far worse than anger. Sarah, you can't. Not with your circumstances. You don't have housing. You don't have stable income. And for long-term custody, Massachusetts requires either a two-income household or strong financial stability. Sarah's breath left her in a painful rush. Jacob's face crumpled. He backed away from the table, shaking. I knew it, he whispered. You're just like the others. His heartbreak split through the room, raw, piercing, devastating. Sarah reached for him, but he turned from her, crying into his hands. When she left Quincy Children's Center, her eyes burned, her heart hollow, her steps unsteady. She had thought losing Nathan was the worst grief she would ever feel. But walking away from Jacob that day taught her a deeper kind of pain, the pain of loving someone she had no power to save. Sarah didn't sleep for 2 nights after leaving Jacob at Quincy Children's Center. She went through the motions of cleaning houses, folding towels, scrubbing showers, but every quiet moment filled with the same image. Jacob standing in that sterile room, crying into his hands as if the world had finally confirmed what he feared most. By the 3rd day, her exhaustion showed. When Daniel arrived home early and found her wiping the same clean counter for the 3rd time, he paused. Sarah, are you all right? His tone was gentle, concerned rather than intrusive. She froze, shoulders tightening. For weeks, she had carried everything alone. But now, the truth pressed so heavily on her chest that silence felt impossible. She set the cloth down carefully. There's something I need to tell you, she said. He guided her to the kitchen table. Whatever it is, you can talk to me. So she did. She told him everything. The trip to the cabin, the noises behind the door, the frightened boy curled in the closet, the day she had kept Jacob with her, his fever, the urgent care visit, and ultimately, the painful return to Quincy Children's Center. Daniel listened without interrupting, his face shifting from confusion to shock, then to something deeper, fear, grief, disbelief. When she finished, the cabin keys lay on the table between them, a silent wait. Jacob, Daniel repeated softly. 7 or 8 years old. Yes, and he said he visited the cabin years ago as part of a foster trip. Yes. Daniel's throat worked. He stood abruptly and walked to the far counter, gripping the edge as if steadying himself. For several moments he said nothing. Then, quietly, I need to make a call. He stepped outside onto the back porch. Sarah remained frozen at the table, listening to the muffled, tense cadence of his voice. He spoke to someone at the foster system's central office, requesting information, careful to avoid violations, framing his questions in broad, non-identifying terms. But then the tone of the conversation changed. His voice sharpened, lowered, stopped entirely. When he re-entered the kitchen, he looked as if the air had been punched out of him. Sarah. He sank into the chair across from her. Jacob's last name is Mercer. She blinked, confused. But, you said, not my side of the family. His voice strained. My fiancée, Emily, before she died. He swallowed hard. She told me she had a miscarriage 2 years before we met. I believed her. I never questioned it. Silence swept through the room like a cold wind. And if the dates match, if he was conceived when she was still with her previous partner, Daniel's voice trailed off. He could be my son. I never knew. She never told me. Grief flickered across his features. Grief for a past he hadn't understood. For a child he might have lost without even realizing. Sarah reached forward instinctively but stopped herself. The moment felt too raw for touch. I didn't know, she whispered. Daniel. I swear, I know. He pinched the bridge of his nose. But if he's my child, I have to find out. Across the hall, a door slammed sharply. They both flinched. Victoria, She stood there, framed by the doorway, her eyes burning with an emotion that was not just anger, something more jagged, unstable. "You," she hissed at Sarah. "Of course it's you." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Victoria, now isn't the time." But she ignored him completely, stepping closer to Sarah with rigid precision, like someone walking a tightrope already framed beneath her. "You think I don't see what you're doing?" Victoria's voice quivered with rage, sneaking around, keeping secrets, trying to make him feel sorry for you. Sarah stood slowly. "Victoria, that's not. Don't lie to me," she snapped. The veneer of poise she always wore cracked straight down the center. "You want to replace me. Replace everything. You bring some random child into the picture and expect us to believe this wasn't a setup." Daniel stepped forward, alarmed. "Stop. Sarah didn't do anything wrong." Victoria turned on him, eyes wild. "You're defending her? Over me? When she's clearly manipulating all of us." Her breathing quickened. Shoulders shook. She pressed a trembling hand to her temple as if trying to hold something inside. Rage, fear, or unraveling reason. "You kidnapped a child," Victoria whispered harshly at Sarah. "You hid him for days. You tried to use him to crawl your way into this family, into Daniel's life. Do you think I'm stupid?" Sarah's pulse pounded. "I was trying to protect him." "You were trying to take what isn't yours." Daniel moved between them. "Victoria, enough." But the words only sent her spiraling further. Her voice rose, breaking, trembling. "He's mine," she cried. "Daniel is mine. This family is mine. And I won't let you destroy it." The room fell silent except for the sound of her ragged breathing. Sarah stood frozen, shaken by the sudden, ferocious collapse of Victoria's composure. Daniel's expression shifted from frustration to something closer to fear. Victoria wasn't angry. She was unraveling. And whatever came next would not be simple. The air in the Mercer kitchen felt charged, sharp, electric, on the verge of snapping. Victoria stood rigid, eyes glassy, chest rising and falling with erratic, staccato breaths. Sarah recognized the expression instantly. She had seen it before in Nathan during his worst rages. It was the moment when reason drained out of a person and something unpredictable took its place. "Victoria!" Sarah said softly, hands raised slightly in placation. "Let's just talk." But the calmness only triggered something more violent. With a sudden, animalistic cry, Victoria lunged. Her fist twisted into Sarah's hair, yanking so hard Sarah stumbled backward with a gasp. Pain exploded across her scalp. Then came the first slap, sharp, ringing, vicious. Sarah's head whipped sideways. Before she could steady herself, another slap followed, then another, fueled by raw panic rather than strength. "You won't take him from me!" Victoria screamed, spit catching in the corners of her mouth. "You won't ruin this family." Sarah tried to pull free, but Victoria's grip tightened. The room blurred. Her ears rang. She struggled to breathe, to think, to stay upright. "Stop, Victoria! Let go!" she choked, but Victoria's screams drowned everything out. Then, in one horrifying moment, Victoria released her hair and lunged toward the kitchen drawer. Metal clattered. Sarah froze. Victoria straightened with a cold glint in her hand. A stainless steel icing spatula with a pointed tip, heavy and sharp enough to cause real harm. "Victoria!" "No." Sarah backed away, heart pounding against her ribs. "Put it down." But Victoria advanced, voice cracking into hysteria. "You don't get to come into this house and take what's mine." Sarah's back hit the counter. There was nowhere to go. The world tunneled into the raised metal in Victoria's shaking grip. "Victoria!" A voice roared from the front door. "Daniel!" He rushed into the kitchen just as Victoria swung. Sarah ducked, the blade missing her cheek by inches. Daniel grabbed Victoria's arm mid-arc, forcing it upward, struggling to keep her from breaking free. Are you out of your mind? He yelled, wrestling the weapon from her hand. It clattered to the floor. Victoria thrashed wildly, screaming incoherently. A mix of accusations, sobs, gasps. Daniel held her firmly, his face stricken with shock and something closer to heartbreak. Sarah, call 911, he commanded. Sarah's hands trembled violently as she dialed. Her voice barely worked, but the operator understood enough to dispatch officers immediately. Within minutes, 2 Boston patrol units pulled up outside. Officers entered through the front door, hands near their holsters until Daniel, still restraining Victoria, shouted, "She attacked our housekeeper! She had a weapon!" Victoria, now sobbing uncontrollably, made little sense as officers separated her from Daniel and secured her hands behind her back. When one officer read her rights, she screamed Sarah's name with fury and betrayal, as though Sarah had personally engineered her downfall. Sarah stood shaking, holding her arm where Victoria's nails had raked skin. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks swollen, her breathing shallow. An officer approached gently. "Ma'am, are you injured anywhere else?" She shook her head, though every muscle throbbed. "Do you want medical attention?" "No, I'm okay," she whispered. I need to sit." They took her statement in the living room while Daniel spoke with another officer near the entryway. The charges were clear: assault and battery. Assault with a dangerous weapon, attempted bodily harm. Victoria would be taken for booking and a psychological evaluation. When the officers escorted Victoria out, her legs buckled. She locked eyes with Daniel one last time, rage, fear, and shattered pride mixing into something hollow. Then she was gone. The next days moved like fog, quiet, heavy, surreal. Sarah stayed mostly in her hotel room, waiting for news, replaying the attack again and again. Daniel updated her through careful texts. Victoria was being held pending a mental health assessment. His attorney advised a restraining order. Then, 3 days later, he called. "Sarah," he said, breath unsteady. "The DNA results came back." She braced herself. "He's mine," Daniel whispered. "Jacob, he's my son." The words carried both grief and astonishment, like a door to a past he never knew existed had swung open. "Daniel, I'm so sorry," she said softly. "No," he replied. "I'm not sorry. I'm going to bring him home." He filed immediately for emergency, temporary custody, supported by the DNA findings and a letter from his attorney. Within 48 hours, the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families reviewed the case. Biological parent priority, stable income, established residence. Daniel met every criterion. DCF approved reunification. Sarah was with Daniel when he walked into Quincy Children's Center. Jacob sat in a chair in the visitation room, small shoulders tense, hands tucked into his sleeves. When he saw Daniel, confusion flickered, then fear, then something softer, a recognition he couldn't name. Daniel knelt. "Jacob, I'm your dad." Jacob blinked, almost disbelieving. Then Daniel opened his arms. The boy stepped forward slowly, then collided into him with desperate, shaking relief. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Later, as they walked out of the center, Jacob holding Daniel's hand, Daniel turned to her. "Sarah," he said, voice full of quiet sincerity, "I trust you. I need your help. Jacob feels safe with you. Will you help me transition him home?" The question hit her with unexpected warmth. "Yes," she said softly. "Of course." As the 3 of them stepped into the cold Boston afternoon, father, son, and the woman who had bridged the space between them, the weight of the past weeks shifted. Something new was beginning. The months that followed felt like a slow exhale after years of holding breath. With custody secured, Daniel devoted himself to parenting with an earnestness that softened the house. But nothing eased the transition quite like Sarah's presence. She visited daily at first, helping Jacob adjust, establishing routines, teaching him gentle habits that made him feel secure. Then, when it became clear the boy clung to her as tightly as warmth itself, Daniel offered her the small guest room at the end of the hall. "It's temporary," he said shyly, "just until Jacob feels fully settled." But it never felt temporary. It felt necessary. The Mercer home slowly shifted from quiet formality into something lived in and comforting. Breakfasts shared around the kitchen table. Homework spread across the dining room. Evenings of cartoons, soft laughter, and the kind of calm that had been foreign to Sarah for years. Jacob adjusted with surprising speed. He followed Daniel from room to room with new confidence and shadowed Sarah with equal devotion. At night, he knocked softly on her door, not afraid, just wanting reassurance she was still there. She would tuck him in again, smoothing his hair, whispering small assurances until he drifted off. One evening, as she adjusted the blanket around his shoulders, Jacob murmured, half asleep, "You're the only person who never left me." The words struck her deeply. She sat beside him long after he fell fully asleep, absorbing the truth of it. She had come into his life by accident or fate, or something unnamed, but she had stayed by choice. Daniel noticed it too. He watched her with a quiet gratitude that carried no expectation, no pressure, just respect. The awkwardness that had once flickered between them dissolved into something gentle and familiar. Winter melted into spring. The snow gave way to budding trees along the Charles River. On a bright Saturday morning, Sarah took Jacob to the park near Boston Common while Daniel finished errands. She wore a simple coat over her cleaning uniform, old habits of practicality lingering despite her new stability. Jacob ran toward the playground, laughter echoing as he climbed the wooden structure. Sarah sat on a bench, closing her eyes for a moment under the sun. But the peace fractured when she heard her name, slurred and sharp. "Sarah!" Her eyes snapped open. Nathan stood near the walkway, staggering slightly, a half-emptied bottle sticking from the pocket of his wrinkled jacket. His eyes were glassy, his hair unkempt, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of every bad decision now pressed down on him. "Sarah, wait, he called, stumbling closer. "I've been looking for you. I need to talk." Her pulse quickened. Memories of shouting, slammed doors, and broken dignity pressed at her ribs. She rose slowly, instinctively stepping back. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly. Nathan huffed a broken laugh. "You? Trouble? You were nothing without me." His eyes glinted with the bitter remnants of a pride long gone. "I lost everything. My parents, my job. And you just walk away and build a new life." Sarah stiffened, but before she could respond, a tall figure approached from behind. Daniel. He arrived with calm precision, placing himself between them, not aggressively, but with quiet authority. His presence alone shifted the dynamic. "That's enough," Daniel said evenly. "You're done here." Nathan scoffed. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who won't let you harass her," Daniel replied. Nathan stepped forward, but Daniel didn't budge. His voice stayed low, controlled, firm without raising a hand. "You need to walk away. Now." For a long moment, Nathan wavered between defiance and defeat. But when Jacob's voice called, "Sarah, look at me," Nathan's expression darkened with something ugly. Recognition of a life he no longer belonged to. He turned abruptly, muttering under his breath, and staggered away down the sidewalk. Sarah exhaled, but her hand shook. Daniel touched her elbow gently. "You're safe," he said, not as a promise, but as a truth. And for the first time in years, she believed it. 6 months passed. The house in Brookline bloomed with quiet joy. Jacob thrived under stability, art projects taped to the fridge, shoes piled messily by the back door, giggles drifting down the hallway at bedtime. Daniel and Sarah worked side by side, their connection deepening in the natural, unhurried way of people who healed together. Affection didn't burst into existence. It grew, rooted in trust, respect, and the shared responsibility of raising a child who finally felt loved. One summer afternoon, the three of them visited a small bakery in their neighborhood. The owner offered them samples of wedding cakes she was preparing for the weekend. Jacob took one bite of vanilla sponge with raspberry filling. His eyes widened in innocent wonder. "This," he declared proudly, "is the best thing I've ever had." Daniel and Sarah exchanged a glance, warm, full, quiet. A family reborn, standing at the glass display case of a bakery, tasting the sweetness of a future none of them had expected, a future they chose together